Canada is applying the finishing touches to a stunning $4.7 billion infrastructure project over the Detroit River. The Gordie Howe International Bridge will connect the American city of Detroit to Windsor, Ontario, and has been dubbed the most important bridge connection in North America. But the bridge itself isn't unique. In fact, it is the third major crossing in this small Windsor-Detroit corridor. So what makes the bridge so special? Why is Canada paying for all of it? And why might this massive megaproject turn into a disaster? In today's video, we try to answer these questions with a deeper dive into Canada's Gordie Howe International Bridge, a megaproject which is set to open in September 2025. In 2024, Canada and the US traded more than $760 billion worth of goods, making them the second largest trade partners in the world. About 30% of these traded goods go through this narrow strip, making it the busiest land border crossing on the continent. And for the last 96 years, the lion's share of cross-border traffic through this corridor uses the 1.4-mile-long Ambassador Bridge. Built in 1929, the Ambassador Bridge is arguably the most important border crossing in the world. However, despite its obvious utility, the bridge is no longer a dependable piece of infrastructure. The most glaring problem is that this bridge is privately owned by Detroit's Maroon family. Neither the US nor the Canadian government has any control over the movement across it. Over-reliance on a privately owned international bridge is never a good idea. However, the problem has intensified over the years because of the aging structure of the bridge. The Ambassador Bridge is a 4-lane crossing, and with more than 10,000 truckers crossing the bridge every day, it has become a potential choke point. But since it is privately owned, the government cannot force an extension. With traffic increasing every year and congestion becoming commonplace, both Canada and the US were losing millions of dollars every week. Calls for an alternative crossing to replace or unburden the Ambassador Bridge had been growing louder since the 80s, and hence the idea for the Gordie Howe Bridge was born. In 2001, 4 federal and 2009 that a formal proposal was brought forward by Canadian lawmakers, which was later approved by the Obama administration in 2013. Canada had decided to build bigger and better. A new 6-lane river crossing less than 2 miles from the Ambassador Bridge was to become the 120th land border crossing between the two countries, completing a key piece of missing infrastructure. The project was named after the legendary Canadian ice hockey player Gordie Howe, who had played for the Detroit Red Wings for 25 years. At 2.5 kilometers, or about 1.5 miles long, the Gordie Howe Bridge will be the second longest bridge crossing between the US and Canada. With 6 traffic lanes, it will solve the congestion problems plaguing the Ambassador Bridge. Moreover, the bridge will directly connect Highway 401 and the I-75 in Michigan, solving another major issue as both the Ambassador Bridge and the nearby Windsor-Detroit Tunnel route traffic through populated areas in Windsor. The megaproject does not just include the bridge construction. In addition, it reimagines the whole border crossing, with new buildings and structures for both the US and Canadian ports of entry. On the Canadian side, a 130-acre construction site, 16 toll booths for both passenger and commercial vehicles, 24 lanes for border inspection facilities. The US side is even bigger, with 36 primary inspection lanes and 13 structures for the border authorities. The massive building space makes it the largest Canadian port along the Canada-US border. The estimated cost at the beginning of the project was close to $4 billion, with the Canadian government agreeing to foot the bill for the whole project on both sides of the border. The decision to pay for the bridge was taken because of the Obama administration's Buy American Act. The act stated that any construction or maintenance of a public building would be blocked unless all of the iron, steel, and manufactured goods used in the project were produced in the United States. When Canada agreed to pay for the Gordie Howe Bridge, an exemption was made in the procurement rules permitting the use of Canadian iron and steel. In return, the Canadian government will own and operate the bridge and will get their money back through tolls. That is also why the toll booths will only operate on the Canadian end of the bridge, earning Canada $100 million a year by 2030. Once all the legalities were ironed out, it was finally time to build the bridge. Construction on the crossing began in 2018 with a completion timeline of 6 years. Since then, the bridge has made headlines for its captivating design and construction milestones. Gordie Howe is a cable-stayed bridge, which means the structure is supported by a series of cables connected directly to the bridge's 2 main towers. This is a different approach from the commonly used suspension bridge design, which can be seen at the Golden Gate or George Washington bridges. Over the years, cable-stayed bridge design has become cheaper, quicker, and more efficient than suspension bridges. In fact, an 853-meter-long main bridge span makes the Gordie Howe Bridge the longest cable-stayed bridge in North America. The 6-lane bridge deck is about 125 feet wide and was built using 54 pre-designed segments simultaneously installed from both sides of the border. Connecting the bridge in the middle is a special concrete segment that took 6 weeks to install in 2023. A total of 216 cables were installed to hold the bridge deck together. However, the most recognizable part of this megaproject are the 2 bridge towers on opposite banks of the Detroit River. Standing at 722 feet or 220 meters tall, the tower design resembles an ice hockey stick as a tribute to the legend who lends his name to the bridge. 25 years in the making, the Gordie Howe International Bridge was originally slated to open in 2024. However, the completion date was pushed back a year because of labor shortages during the pandemic. The delays have also added $700 million to the estimated cost of the project. However, it is set to reshape trade across North America, with one industry in particular benefiting the most. Detroit, also known as Motor City, is the heart of the U.S. automobile industry. The city is home to General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis, the big 3 automobile manufacturers in the country. On the other side of the border, Windsor is arguably an equally significant hub for the Canadian auto industry and is often referred to as the automobility capital of Canada. When combined, the Detroit-Windsor corridor becomes the beating heart of the North American auto industry. Every year, more than $50 billion worth of auto parts and manufactured cars are traded through this corridor. During the manufacturing life cycle, auto parts move up to 7 times across the border. All of these big car manufacturers follow a just-in-time manufacturing model that cuts inventory costs by ensuring that parts and materials arrive at the assembly lines exactly when needed. So a border crossing free of congestion and delays saves the auto industry billions of dollars. The Gordie Howe is truly a game-changer for the legacy car makers, but that's just a small part of the positive outcomes associated with the bridge. Once open for traffic, the Gordie Howe will close a long-standing gap in a major international trucking corridor. The bridge forms a 1,500-mile uninterrupted highway stretch from Florida to Montreal, making the journey much more desirable for all industries. For now, truckers will keep waiting in line on the Ambassador Bridge, but once the Gordie Howe becomes operational, it will save nearly 1 million hours of waiting time every year. So what happens next to the Ambassador Bridge? The 6-lane Gordie Howe Bridge will be extended to 8 lanes and will take at least 2/3 of the traffic currently using the Ambassador Bridge. However, it is not replacing the century-old bridge and is simply relieving it of most of its traffic burden. In fact, the Ambassador Bridge is likely to remain an important crossing, especially during times of high traffic volumes or any unforeseen emergencies. At the same time, the private owners of the Ambassador Bridge are still trying to add new lanes to the structure. However, the Canadian government has warned them against any new construction. The only change that is allowed is to demolish the aging structure and build a new one instead. As of June 2025, the Gordie Howe International Bridge is more than 95% complete, and the only remaining work is installation of LED lights. Then begins the months-long testing of critical systems to make sure that the bridge can endure the constant flow of heavy traffic. Despite the delays, Canada's most important future border crossing is ready to change the landscape of North American trade. However, a very real threat may still derail this stunning piece of infrastructure.
There are growing fears of a major global trade war tonight after President Trump announced sweeping tariffs on imports from Canada, Mexico and China starting tomorrow.
On January 20th, his first day in office, President Donald Trump announced 25% tariffs on goods imported from Canada. Those tariffs came into effect on April 3rd and immediately put automakers on both sides of the border under immense pressure. Just a day later, Stellantis closed down its manufacturing plant in Windsor for 2 weeks, signaling a major shift in the industry. This was followed by a very public feud between the two governments, with Donald Trump calling for the annexation of Canada. The newly elected Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, reciprocated in a similar tone.
The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperations, is over.
In a highly charged political environment, cross-border travel also plummeted by 32%. These are not great developments for the Gordie Howe Bridge, which was estimated to earn more than $70 million in tolls in its first year of operation. However, with more tariffs on the way, cross-border travel will take a further hit, and the estimated earnings may be cut by half. It also means that the Gordie Howe International Bridge will take more than 50 years to make its money back without delivering the promised benefits. Despite these very real threats, optimism surrounds the Gordie Howe International Bridge. Developers believe that trade policies can change in an instant, and one presidency cannot define the success or failure of an infrastructure project set to serve for 125 years. But what do you guys think? Will the Gordie Howe Bridge be as successful as predicted, or is it on its way to becoming a white elephant? Comment your thoughts below and keep following Signum for more fascinating stories behind the world's biggest mega projects.